Good evening and welcome to Live, Love, and Marry Wizerr, where our mission is in our name. Proverbs 4:7 says, Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, but with all thy getting, get understanding. And we come every week to help you get understanding for your life, your love, your marriage. And this week, as well as last week, we talked about children. And so we are continuing our conversation today. Unfortunately, it's not a conversation because my co host is not able to be here. But I hope that you will be in the chat and that you will give me something to respond to. I'm just going to share some thoughts as we go along. Thank you for being here with us. We appreciate you joining us live, and those who are watching the replay, we thank you for to you as well. You make up the bulk of our viewership, and so we don't want to forget you. And so we thank you for all of your support. As you know, last week we started season 8, and so we're very excited about just what God is doing through this ministry, and we hope that it is serving you as well. So, do I have any updates? Let's share this update. The book, Single on Purpose. I don't have I do have a cover that's already designed, so I'll show you that next week. Hopefully, you will join us next week. But I'll show you the cover. But the book is at the editor, so this is a huge step. Actually, it's been there for a couple weeks now. And so we are moving ever closer to having that released and having you have access to that. Shout me out in the chat. Let me know that you're here, especially now that my co-host is not able to be here. I need you all to talk back to me since we're live and give me some feedback. But so Single on Purpose is the name of the book. Single on Purpose, Embracing the Life You Have, Preparing for the Love You Want. And we are looking forward to sharing more details as we have a launch date for you. And we hope that you will be one of those people who purchase the book and support that part of our ministry. You've supported this part, watching our podcast, but we need you to support the launch of the book so that we can get on the bestseller, because the last book, Pray It Forward, for women who choose to fight on their knees, that devotional was a bestseller on Amazon, and we would like to replicate that and even keep it there longer. We want this, what God has given me over the last 10 years, we want that to get to all the singles that it can get to, and even some married people, because I think there's a lot of gems in there for all people, no matter what your marital status is. And so we hope that you will support that once it comes out, and we'll certainly give you notice and links and all of those things when it's time. So let us see, do we have any? Let me know that you're here, and we appreciate you being here. So last week we started season 8, and we started with we're still in the book, The Adventist Home. And we said before, what does it mean to be an Adventist? It means that you are anxiously waiting for the second coming of Christ, and you want your home to represent that. So you want to live like you're waiting for God to come, for Jesus to come back. And so these are some beautiful steps. We've talked about your life, we've talked about marriage, we've talked about dating, we've talked about like finding your home and where you should live. And we talked about living in the country. And, there was a time, and there are still probably people who think that's silly. It's like, you don't need to live in the country. You're fine. If you're a Christian, you're good. But there are a lot of influences that you can protect yourself and your children from when you live further out into the country and you're not in the city. You may have to work in the city, or they may even have to go to school in the city, but that's not necessarily true. A lot of people are homeschooling, and there are schools in the country too. But thinking about all aspects of your life, your love, and your marriage, and God has a plan for that. God has an ideal for that. And so we want to be thinking about that as we are making our decisions on who to date, how they think about these things. Are they getting guidance? Even from this book, we said, this book is available for you to purchase. I don't know, my glasses keep slipping, so I apologize for that. But are they getting guidance from someone other than themselves? This is super important to have an effective marriage, that both parties have accountability, they have mentors, they're coaches, they have wisdom that is outside of themselves. The Bible is important first. God and prayer obviously is important first. But we need people in our lives who have lived this thing out, or who have been given wisdom from God, who care about you and want to see you do your best to have the best marriage, to give you sound advice, who can tell you the hard things. And so this book certainly tells you hard things. Onita, who is our co-host, she has been married 25 years. And she's still, every time we get to a chapter, she's like, man, this is rough. This is rough. Things that you wish you knew before you got married, things that you're still learning now that she's raising 4 children, and still, trying to do marriage right. So all of these, this is for everyone. So our session last week, we started talking about children as an inheritance of the Lord, and how important that relationship is, how important the gift of having children is for those who don't have any children, such as myself, or those who maybe can't have children. I think you appreciate the gift sometimes more than the people who do have them. And I'm sure if they were harassing you all day long saying mommy 100 times, you might not appreciate the gift at that moment. But in general, we want to appreciate the inheritance. But it's not just having children to have fun and play with and be like, oh, they look like me, or this is about me. But you are specifically, the passage last week, one of the passages we read was that you are gifted them, let them actually, to raise them as citizens for heaven. And so this is a huge responsibility that many people are not thinking about when they get pregnant or decide to have children, or don't decide to have children and just end up pregnant. And God is calling us to a higher standard that allows us to make different choices, to be intentional about the choices we make. So we spent several weeks talking about the intentional choices around dating and relationships, and who to marry and when to marry, and how to marry, where to live, all of those. So now we're talking about the intentional choices around children. Today we have a special topic where we're talking about caring for needy children, caring for children that are orphaned, or as we would say, in foster care, and in our country and many other countries. So what kind of legacy are you leaving? Because even if you don't give birth to a child, you still have a responsibility to leave a legacy whether they're with you for 6 months or they're with you for their whole childhood, you have a responsibility to be planting seeds in them that direct them toward the kingdom of God. So let's jump in here. As always, I'm going to jump in with a quote and we will go from there. Many a father who has died in the faith, resting upon the eternal promise of God, has left his loved ones in full trust that the Lord would care for them. And how does the Lord provide for these bereaved ones? He does not work a miracle in sending manna from heaven. He does not send ravens to bring them food, but he works a miracle upon human hearts, expelling selfishness from the soul and unsealing the fountains of benevolence. He tests the love of his professed followers by committing to their tender mercies the afflicted and bereaved ones. That was too long for me to type out and put on the screen. But this, as always, kicks off this conversation to say, God uses us to be the miracle in the life of a child who's lost a parent or both of their parents. We have, a high percentage of single family homes in the United States, at least. And a lot of children in foster care, a lot of them don't even know who their fathers are. But, and maybe they end up in foster care because their mother is on drugs, or maybe she dies or something happens to her. She's incarcerated. And so even for children whose parents are alive, which they're, the foster care system now, their preference is to reunify families, make sure it's a safe place where the children are not neglected or harmed. But that's not always possible. And in the interim, while they're working on the parents or that situation, those children need someplace to go. And this book is saying, this writer, led by the Holy Spirit, is saying that Christians, people who call themselves children of God, should be the people that are taking in these children to take care of them. We are the miracle. She's saying we are a miracle. He doesn't send manna from heaven and all of that stuff that he did in the Bible. He sends people with loving hearts to say, okay, I'm going to stop being selfish and I'm going to take one of these children in and or more, and I'm going to bestow my love and care and attention to this child who is afflicted and bereaved. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And so if you're in the chat, talk to me about that. What are your thoughts about that? There's a section on here that says it's the responsibility of the church. Now, obviously, she's not talking about the church building. She's talking about the people in the church. It is the responsibility of the church to take care of fatherless and motherless children. James says, this is true religion, that you will care for the fatherless and the widows. And let's be clear, churches are not doing that very often. Am I right? Like, there are people in the church, but as a collective, often churches are not feeling like or even thinking about this as their responsibility. And so what are your thoughts in the chat? What are your thoughts about how the church should be addressing children who are orphans or in foster care? What is our responsibility? What are your thoughts about that? I was watching, let me know if you saw this movie as well, The Sound of Hope. I saw it last year. It came out about a year ago, actually, 4th of July of last year. And The Sound of Hope was about a church, and I can't remember, I think it's in Texas, that a small church in Texas, that 22 families, I think almost every family in the church, it was a really small church, almost every family in the church adopted 77 children, so that there were no children in that area that needed foster care, needed a home, because they adopted. And the children that were the ones that were available were the children that were the hardest to place. And so this church, I don't know if you can still see the movie. It's not in theaters anymore, but it's a beautiful movie, and it's based on real life. So it's not fiction. This actual church in an actual town decided that they were going to take this charge seriously and literally, that the Bible says they should be taking care of the fatherless. And so they went to social services, they made connection, and the 22 families adopted 77 children. It was mind-blowing to me. Now, those children are all adults now, and have their own children. But I just thought that was a beautiful thing. And I had decided was going to do foster care. I ended up not doing that, but becoming the guardian of a young man. And that was really hard because I was single by myself. I think it would have helped to have a husband in that situation, as many situations would be helped by having a husband. But and he's an adult now, and he didn't make the best choices. But here's why. This in this chapter, it says, there is a wide field of usefulness before all who will work for the master in caring for these children and youth who have been deprived of the watchful guidance of parents and the subduing influence of a Christian home. Many of the children that we're talking about aren't from Christian homes. And so they have not had that influence. And for those who even came from Christian homes, a lot of the parents aren't thinking the way that we're talking. So the influence still may not have been as strong. Maybe they are more familiar with church and God and all of those things. But a lot of children aren't in Christian homes. And so she says many of them have inherited evil traits of character. And some have had nurtured evil traits of character, where the parents have not addressed those things and before they either disappeared or died. And if left to grow up in ignorance, they will drift into associations that lead to vice and crime. These unpromising children need to be placed in a position favorable for the formation of a right character, that they may become children of God. Remember, we're raising them to become citizens of heaven. And a lot of children, more than we think, there are a lot of children in this world who don't have any association or connection to God or church or any of that. Many, certainly in my generation, it was very uncommon for a family, particularly a family of color, to not be in church. Like, church was part of your life. Church was your social structure. Church was just integral to your life at that time. And I think that's true of all cultures at that time. But now there are children who grow up who never step foot into a church. They haven't heard about God. They don't know anything about God. They don't know anything about church or Sabbath school or Sunday school or any of those things. And so this chapter is enjoining us to say, we need to be thinking about how can we influence those children for good? Now, in that movie, they said something that I then went and researched and was like, oh, I'm not sure if that's true. So let me check it out. They said that if every church in the United States adopted one child, then it would there would be no more children in foster care or orphans. Now, I wasn't sure if they said in the world or in the United States, but when I looked it up, it said definitely not in the world. But because you'd have to adopt like 47 children. And if your church has 22 family, well, this church adopted 77 children, but that's less likely. But it did say in the Gospel Coalition that if 17% of the churches in the United States adopted one child, and then they grouped them by 6 churches and said if these 6 churches adopted one child every 5 years, so for new children coming into foster care, then there would be a vacancy. There wouldn't be any children in foster care. So think about that. 17%, that's less than a quarter of churches. And of course, there are churches that are really small, which this was as well. So that's not really an excuse, but I'm just saying there are churches that are really small. Maybe most of their median age is like 65. And so that might be a little bit more challenging. But there are a lot of churches. If we only need 17%, that means there's a lot to choose from. But if we don't have this mindset that we need to be the interrupters of this scourge of having our children, and they are our children. If they're God's children, they're our children. Of having children in foster care, going from house to house, and you know, there are some fantastic foster homes. I know some foster parents who are awesome, but there are some very evil and abusive foster homes as well. And then what child wants to just be going from place to place? They want to be stable. They want to be loved. They want to be cared for. They want to have their own room. They want to have parents that love them. And so if we were focused on making that a priority, we could eliminate it here in the United States, and we could probably put a significant dent if all the churches in the world, now I wasn't sure why they just said United States adopted all the kids in the world, because I don't think that's necessary. If all the churches in the world took this on, I think we'd have a fighting chance. And then even if it's one family, obviously it'd be one family adopting a child. If the church rallied around that family, if that church had support for that family and reprieve for that family and all of the things with their natural children too, not just their adopted children, what a powerful witness of God's love that would be. Because the social worker in this town in Sound of Hope, she was blown away. I don't think that she was very religious, but when the pastor came to her and said, we want to do this, and she realized that they were serious, she was so happy, because these were children that she had been unable to place. And even though it was rocky, so let's be honest, it was hard. Some of them wanted to give up, and some of them were just like struggling. There was situation after situation, but they came through. So we have a responsibility. So what about people who are childless? There's an injunction here to talk about, we even mentioned last week that sometimes we can become really selfish when we don't have to be responsible for children or anyone else. We just do our own thing, spend our money however we want, go live our best life, all of those things. But we are encouraged to, as this says, expel the selfishness from our heart and think about how much of an impact we could have on a child's life, not just here, but for eternity, if we would decide to make this a priority. I thought it was funny because she was saying that, people lavish all of this money and time and expense on animals, which she called dumb, and in the sense that they don't talk, they are dumb. Um, and they don't have a heaven or hell to go to. But these children are left with no one to care for them, no one to pay attention and time and investment on them. And so they are not seeing or experiencing the love of Christ in their life. So I think we should think about that. I think if you're a single person, obviously there are a lot of single people who adopt. I'm not mad at that. There are a lot of single people who have children in other ways. I'm not mad at that. There are a lot of single people who didn't plan to be single as parents, but they've ended up single as parents. So this is not an impossible thing. Obviously, it's a little bit more challenging to bring a child, especially an older child, because those tend to be the ones harder to put in foster care or get adopted. So not the cute little baby that you start from the beginning and raise, which that's possible too, but to have a child who's 5 or even 10 years old, who's really their character is well developed at that point, for good or for not. And so trying to navigate that can be really difficult. But if God is impressing you, then go forward. But what I will say is that if you aren't able to adopt, because everybody can't do that, or foster, you could support those who do. If you have means or resources or money, you can help, support them. You can be a godparent, an aunt or uncle, to help support someone who has adopted. You can you can volunteer in different circumstances to navigate situations that are supportive of children who are orphans or in foster care. So there's a lot that we could do that is practical, that can benefit these children and humanity and ultimately their souls, if we actually took the time to say, hey, this is the church's responsibility. This is my responsibility as a Christian to be attentive to these needs. And it's really, this quote says, as far as lies in your power, make a home for the homeless. And she's not necessarily talking about, and the friendless. She's not necessarily talking about, adults, though that's part of the deal too. We talk about that another time, but talking about children and being able to leave a legacy for them. They don't have to be your biological children to do that. You can do that in a healthy, loving way, and you can plant seeds of God's goodness in their heart just because of your interaction. You can be a big brother, a big sister. You can mentor a child who maybe is fostering or being fostered or adopted by, someone at your church. You could become a mentor to that child. Now, there are some, once you're fostering, there are some, legalities that you have to go through in order to do that, but do it. Make yourself available. And this is really a test of us as Christians. We are God's people, and that means that we, first of all, were adopted by Him into His family, and we should be looking to do the same thing. But when we're talking about legacy, what does that even mean? Like, what kind of legacy are we supposed to be implanting in our children, as well as any children that we bring into our home or our lives? And we have inherited traits and cultivated traits that are ungodly. All of us. All of us do. And so we need to be mindful about asking God to clean us out, to surrender those things to God so that we're not passing those things on to our children, whether biological or not. Now, if they're biological, they will inherit some of those negative traits if you don't get rid of them. And we talked about that. So some of the um, things that we pass down come from our parents and grandparents and all of those things. But physical and mental conditions are passed down. Now, some of it is cultivated because we make the same choices for our children that our parents made for us. So those can be broken as well. But our legacy to our children should be something that fits them for the kingdom of heaven. We are, if you are look at a lot of people, I don't know if you've ever said this, but I've said this a lot in my life. Why did God let them be a parent? Some people just shouldn't be parents. Like, I'm just like, put it straight up out there. Some people should not be parents. Besides the obvious abusive and cruel and the addicts and all, that we should all agree with that. But some people are just, they're so selfish. They are very controlling. They don't have any sense of an investment into that child for God. They think they own that child, or this child is there for um, their own benefit, to say, hey, look what I made. But they're not investing for heaven. Now, I have a surprise for you all. Are you ready? I have a surprise guest that is coming on to talk about some things. Hey, look at you. Thank you for joining us. This is Corel Bailey. How are you? Y'all know her. She's been on here before. And I was just talking about, I was saying how some people should not be parents. Obviously, you're not one of those people because I wouldn't have you on here. But I mean, I said, I think I don't, I'm sure we've all said at one point, we've looked at someone and said, why? I just like, why, God, why'd you let them have a child? Because it's just like,
That part.
God has a purpose for every child that he brings into this world. And the circumstances, unfortunately, sin has created circumstances that children are brought into circumstances that they shouldn't, that even animals shouldn't be brought into. But
So true.
talk to me, tell me first of all, why did I ask you to come on here? And then just share your thoughts as we talk about the church's responsibility or people to take care of children who are orphans or who are in foster care.
Right. So, I'm Carl Bailey, and I am a mom of three.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my husband and I have one biological child, and then we have two children who we adopted from foster care. And that is why I have been invited to join today to share our experience, becoming parents of children who, you know, their situations didn't allow them to remain in their homes and they needed a family. So we became their family.
Well, let's go back before you did that. What made you even care about that?
So both DJ and I have like family experiences with foster care. So DJ's grandmother was a foster parent for many, many years when he's growing up. So he, had, foster, cousins and things like that. And I had two aunts that my grandmother's sisters who were foster parents when I was growing up. But for me, what really made me want to be a foster parent at some point when I got older was because my sister, when she was really young, she was probably, I don't know, I'm going to say maybe like around 2 or 3 years old. She had this knot on her head. She had fallen out of the bed, and my mom thought it was because of that. But when she took her to the hospital and she got examined and all that, they found that she had a small fracture in her skull. And so my sister was immediately taken from my mom. And thankfully, because one of my grandmother's sisters was a foster parent, she was able to petition to get my sister to come into her home so she's at least with family and all that. And it was a long process for my mom. Like my sister was away from us for a long time, like over a year.
Oh, wow.
And because they're trying to figure out, did my mom abuse her, all the things. They were coming and interviewing me at school. I was like 7, 8 years old. I'm thinking they're gonna take me and all the things. And come to find out, it was the babysitter that my mom had trusted to care for my sister.
Mhm.
She had hit her over the head with something, and my mom did not know.
Lord have mercy.
And from the investigation, that's what they found out, and that's how that came. And so I was
Wow.
what I took away from that, and remember, it was like, you know, it was hard, like going to visit my sister, at my aunt's house, and it's supervised, and you only have like so many, an hour or whatever it is. And I just remember that from 7, 8 years old. But I also thought, like, what a blessing that this child, who is happens to be my sister, but that my aunt provides this for
Mm-hmm.
children who are actually abused. Like my sister wasn't abused, or at least
Right.
not by my mom, but
Right.
children who are abused or who are neglected and they have no one to care for them. Like, again, my aunt was able to step in and say, I'll take care of her. But what
Mhm.
about kids who don't have family members who will
Yeah.
step in and take care of them? So I was like, when I get older, I want to be that for somebody. I want,
Mhm.
children to know that you are chosen. Like someone does care for you, somebody does love you.
Yeah.
So that was really the motivating force. And so when DJ and I were planning our future together and all that, we talked about, well, what will we do if we want to have children? And we're like, we're fine with having a biological child, but we'd like to adopt at least one. So a child will know, like, God created you for a purpose. And
Mhm.
even if you did not come from us biologically, He still created you to be part of our family.
Yeah.
And we chose to accept that responsibility. So
Wow.
that's how that came about.
That's so awesome. Did you ever have any pushback or resistance from like people in the church when you said that you wanted to do this, especially if you all were talking about it when you were younger, first getting married or whatever? Did you have any people in the say people from the church give you any resistance or pushback on that?
So we had like family members who are Christians, like, well, I know you guys, want to do this, but, you guys are young and you don't know what you're going to want to do with your future. And, you don't know what kind of problems you're going to get if you're taking someone
Mhm.
else's child and all these things. And we're like, what? Like, we're all God's children. So what does it matter? Like, I have my own problems. So,
You don't know what
so
kind of problems you're going to get when you have a biological child either. So,
exactly. Exactly. So it's like it didn't make sense. And then even when we um first became foster parents, like we had like one of our church mothers who was a social worker, and she encouraged us and all that because she saw how we were with other people's kids anyway. We have always had other people's kids. That's just
yes.
always been a thing. Um, and so, but we didn't have any children of our own, and people are like, why would you be thinking about opening your home to other people and you haven't explored having children of your own? And I'm like, okay, first of all, can you get out of our reproductive system? You don't know what we've explored.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
let's stay in our lane there.
Yeah, let's do
But
that.
we were like, we know we're going to do this at some point, But of course, as God has it, once we started down that path, then we ended up getting pregnant with our son. So we're like, okay, we have to put this on hold because we can't go through
Mhm.
this process and become new
Right.
parents at the same time. But we still knew that we wanted to. So as soon as our son was old enough to understand
Mhm.
this is what our family has been called to do, then we picked up right where
Mhm.
we left off.
No, that's so good. Well, not the part where people were telling you not to do it, but I want to,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna come back to that. But just the fact that you just said this is what our family was called to do, not just this is what we're called to do. So
Right.
that's a ministry for Jared too. That, and you can, anybody who knows him can see what a great big brother he is. Um, but I think that the framing it like that can really gives children ownership too,
Mm-hmm.
because if it seems like, oh, you're just going and helping these other kids and now you're ignoring me, and so that can create some issues with their children who are biological, and they're just like, well,
Absolutely.
what about me, what about me? But when it's like, no, this is
Absolutely.
us, this is what we're doing.
This is what we're
So
doing.
what's your role going to be? You're going to be a big brother, and this is what it looks like, and blah 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 blah. So I think that's really powerful, even just from a spiritual perspective, because you don't want to bring a child who has come from challenging circumstances, to say the least, because some of them come from situations that we don't, that are just indescribable, and
Mm-hmm.
to then come into a home that's full of conflict because they're there,
Right.
because other children don't know, or even for people who maybe say, I want to do this, but maybe your husband or wife is not like fully on board. And
Mm-hmm.
so now you're fighting with them, but it's like, no, our family has made this decision. And so I just think that's amazing. Um, so have what it, you talked about, like the resistance that some people brought up, and to be fair, there are some legitimate concerns there.
Right.
Because
There are.
we were just talking before you joined. I was talking about, the title is what kind of legacy are you leaving, and the book was just talking about just the inheritance of some of our evil and cultivated trait, like the traits that we pass on that are not so special,
Right.
like that we get from our parents and all of that, and how we need to kind of be, before we are deciding to have children, how we need to be taking those things to the Lord and just really asking God to kind of heal us from some of those things, so we're not passing those on. But
Right.
when you have a child that's not biologically locked, you don't have any clue what
What
inheritance
you're,
they're
yeah.
coming with. So, how did you navigate the reality of that truth with your calling to this ministry?
So the way we navigated that is kind of the same way that we navigated becoming biological parents for the first time. If God has gifted this child to me, and I trust that He has gifted this child to me, then He's already equipped me with
Mm,
whatever I need to be this child's parent. And I remember my older sister. She said to me, um, "People don't make families; God makes families. So it doesn't matter how your family is created; God makes families." And
mhm.
so that kind of aligns with our belief, right? It
Yeah,
doesn't matter what DNA God required to bring this child into the world.
right.
He placed this child in our home. So this
Hmm.
is our child.
Hmm.
So like it matters for everything that we do with our two adopted children, because how we always approach everything is, you may be an expert in child development or you might be an expert in trauma, but we are experts in these kids,
Uh-huh.
not because we know their history and where they came from or what they experienced, but because God gifted them to us. So that
Mhm.
means He already equipped us. So we're
Yeah,
the experts,
that's
period. In the discussion, we're not even talking about anything else.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. That's so good. So, So how have you communicated to your children that they are adopted? Do they know they're adopted? Do they know what that means? I know that they're different ages, so maybe yes or no. But how do you navigate that? And do you think you need to, or just talk to me about that aspect of it?
So we haven't like come out and just said to them like you're adopted, right? So like
Yeah.
our younger son, he came to us when he was about 16 months old. And we had a situation like maybe when he was in first grade, because he's going to third grade, next school year. So I think when he was like in first grade, he would make comments like, before I was here. And we didn't know where that was coming. Like,
Mm.
what does that mean before I was here? What does that mean to you? So we didn't know if
Yeah.
he's having,
Because like I
how do you
remember before
remember
you were
before you were
here.
here? Because you were 16 months old, like legit, you were still a baby. Um, and so, we just kind of talk to him like through like try to see where he is, like what are his memories, what are those things. Um, but like it's not off the table to tell them that they're adopted. That's just kind of going to be as they grow up. And if that becomes something that's natural, as they're becoming curious about where did I come from and, all those things, we're going to answer those questions honestly. But it's not a thing where we want them to feel like, oh, you're labeled as you're adopted, so you're different, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's not
That's
even like
good.
with family members who at first weren't like on board with it. We had to tell them like this is like you're not going to distinguish between these kids from Jared, like, oh, this is their kid and then these are their adopted kids. No, that's not a thing.
Right.
These are our children,
Right.
period. End of discussion, right?
Mhm.
So again, it's kind of back to that God makes families, right? So
Mhm.
that's how we're going to approach it when that time comes. Now, our daughter, she came to us like she was 3 weeks old. She came straight from the hospital to our home. So
Mhm.
for her, from her perspective, it's no different than Jared, right?
Right.
We're
Right.
all she's ever known.
There's no before.
There is no before. So, again, it's just it depends on what their development requires. It's not a
Mhm.
secret, but it's also not for us. We don't feel like it's pertinent to like they have to know. If it's not something they're curious about, they're like
They don't need
we felt like when we became foster parents, the purpose of us ministering in that way is that we take on the burden of their trauma. Whatever they experienced before were with us,
it.
that's
Mhm.
our responsibility to carry that burden in our memory, in our heart. That's not for them to carry through life.
Yeah,
It's
that's
information if they want to know it, but it's not something that we're going to burden them with. We want their life to
mhm.
be what God intends a child's life to be. You're loved, you're safe, you're cared for, you're provided for. You know God and can make a decision for or against Him for yourself. That's what every child
Mm.
deserves. So that's what all three of
Yeah.
our kids are getting. They're all being raised that way. And so the burden of whatever history came before or created them, it's not important unless God
Mm.
tells them that it's important for them to know that. So if God never
That's
impressions
good.
that on them, then it's not a conversation that we'll have. So
I love that. I never asked you that question actually, so that's pretty cool. Um, what do you think is your responsibility? And I know you're gonna say it's not different than Jared, but what is your responsibility as it relates to their citizenship into heaven? Like, was that something that you considered? Like, God is gifting this for Himself, not
right,
how do you approach that? And all, and then if you could give maybe some counsel to someone who may be thinking about fostering a child who's not 16 months old or 3 weeks old, but who's like 5 years old or 10 years
right.
old. And so they know that they have a history before. and maybe that history didn't include God and church and all of this other stuff.
So for us, so we thought about that as we were going through foster care training, right? Because those are some of the things that they talk about and they teach you when you're going through training. Like some of these kids may never have been to church or any of those things. But because first, let me back up. We didn't go into becoming foster parents intending to adopt. We came into, of course, you become licensed to do both. And we already
Mm-hmm.
made the decision as a family, if a child comes into our home and they can't return to their family, we are their family. But we approached it from the standpoint of we're their godparents, right? So we're here to provide them with this spiritual counseling that they may not have ever received had we not come into their life.
Yeah.
And so, like, we had a foster child before um, our son Zamar came to us, who was with us for 6 months. And his parents were young, they partied, they did drugs, all the things, which is why he came into care. Um, and so we were like, we're going to be his godparents. So we're going to take him to church. We're going to read Bible stories to him. We're going to tell him because we want him to, if he goes back home and he never hears about God in his home again, the seed is planted there and God can
Yep.
grow that seed. But if you never plant the seed, how can anything grow? So that's how we approach that. So that would be my advice to anyone that's, trying to be a foster parent and wanting to take on like those older kids who are usually harder to place because they have history. They're aware of like don't
Mm-hmm.
go into it thinking, oh, I have to replace their parents. I need to like erase this history. No, one of
Right.
the fundamental thing that a kid needs is love. And by the way,
Mm-hmm.
that's what Jesus commands us to do anyway. So
Yeah.
the first thing that you need to do is just show them love. Right. So show them
Somewhere.
love because they may not have ever received that before. You assume that kids, let me tell you, it's not a thing. Like if they're in this
Yeah.
situation, it's because they're not getting love.
Mm-hmm.
So love
Yeah.
them, but plant the seed. You may never know
Mm-hmm.
like our first son went back home, like I said, after 6 months, and that was, oh my goodness, almost 10 years ago at this point.
Can't
And
believe that.
so we don't know where he is in the world, what he's doing, what his parents have done with him. We don't know any of those things, but we know that during the time that God gifted him to us and allowed us to be part of his life, we did what God required us to do for him. And so now he's in God's hands, and God is going to do what he does with that
Mm-hmm.
seed that we planted.
No, that's good. That's so good. And um, I just say for the audience that I was there when their first child, and now let's be clear that Zamar has a special place in my heart. And I don't even like it's just true. And so but when they had their first foster child, I remember him and he was just, sweet little boy. But what I loved about that is that there were so many people in church who were just loving on these kids
Mhm.
when you all had,
Mhm.
you know, and that's, part of this chapter is really saying not everybody is going to be able to foster or adopt a child. That's not everyone's
Right.
gift. No, but your gift may be resources. Your gift may be able to do respite. Your gift may, you can just be the person that when that child comes to church and you're like loving on that child,
Mhm.
that they think of church and God in that kind of
Yep.
way. So it is attractive to them, even if they don't end up staying in that place. They have those good memories of, man, when I went, I didn't really know what that place was, but there was a whole bunch of
Right.
people and they were always trying. me and hug me and love on me and kiss on me and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a powerful message of God's love for a child who is in this situation where you said for the most part many of them have not received that kind of love.
Absolutely.
And so I think that we have to, but we have to be intentional about thinking that we have a responsibility
Mm-hmm.
as a church, because we can be very selfish, which this chapter says, can be selfish, and not even consider that. I was mentioning the movie Sound of Hope, which I'm assuming maybe you've seen
Mm-mm.
it. It's the movie about the church in Texas that adopted 77 children, basically all the children that were in the foster care
In
in
their
their
country.
county.
Wow.
It was like 22 families. They adopted 77 children. It's a beautiful story. And this is like a small church, poor, like, and but the pastor and his wife just they felt the Holy Spirit impressing them. And then it was like they were just riled up the whole church. So everybody was, and they literally, and this is a real story. It wasn't like a fiction. It was like really
Yeah.
happened. And they just wiped out, social services for hard to place children. They had struggles. They had woes. They wanted to give up. They wanted to send them back. They wanted to do the whole
All the
thing.
things.
But they didn't do any of that because they band together and learned how to support each other in that ministry.
Right.
And in that movie, they say this, and so I looked it up, and I mentioned it earlier. They say if every church in the United States adopted one child, then we could eliminate foster care and whatever. Um, but I went and looked that up, and that's it. That's not exactly true for the world.
Right.
I think if every church in the world did, then we certainly can make a significant dent. Because they were saying if every church in the United States had to adopt children to clean out the system of all the orphans that we actually can count. Because there's some countries the count is not even that accurate, even here probably.
Right.
But you have to adopt 47 children. Now this church adopted 77. So, and there was only 22 families. So it's possible, right, but it's not
right.
like, but that if 17% of the churches in the United States adopted one child in the United States, then it would eliminate children from foster care. And then you'd have to kind of have a group of churches adopt one every 5 years because, new children come into this. But I was like, 17%, that's nothing.
Mm-mm.
That's nothing. And so the point I was making is that if we really thought about our responsibility to these children, as James tells us that we have a responsibility to the fatherless and the widows,
mm-hmm,
then we could be making impact, whether it's through adoption or foster care or resources or events that support the church that supported families that did, like we could band around, like there are families in our community who are not Christian. But I guarantee that if we had a system where our churches supported, had days for foster care people, parents to come and maybe receive resources.
mm-hmm.
I know that they get money or whatever, but you need more than money to do. You need more than money, and then like relationships and friendships and all of these things. What an amazing testimony that would be to the children, mm-hmm, who have without love or lost a parent that they did love. Some of them had great families and then, tragedy strikes, yep, and, they're left. And to the families who didn't know that there was a church on the corner, who didn't care about God or think about, like there are so many creative ways that we can minister to children who are suffering in this way, and then ultimately be planting those seeds for the kingdom of God in not just the children, but the families that are navigating that situation. Because it's not easy. I was mentioning, when I had the young man Yes, he was 15, and there was already a whole of situations before, and that was a struggle for me. And one of the things that did help me was having strong men around me who tried to help and have and talk to him and navigate that. Now, there, he was hard headed, and he just he was just like, I'm just no, whatever. We
Right.
tried, but still, I identified men. There was probably like, I would say, 3 or 4 solid godly men who were consistently pouring into his life when he was with
Mm-hmm.
me to try. So, like we're saying with the smaller kids, you're planting seeds there too.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's happening now. And I don't know what's going to happen in his life that's going to come from that. But ultimately, that's the legacy that we want to be leaving in children that we give birth to and children that we don't give birth
Right.
to. Children that live in our home, we have a responsibility because they are a gift from God.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to be not, we don't want to just pass by them as irrelevant. I was preaching a sermon as we start to wrap up here. I was preaching a sermon um, a few months ago for, well, no, I was just doing like a Vesper thought. It was Children's
Mm-hmm.
Day, and I'm the soon to be former children's liaison facilitator. Have votes on the 29th. But I'm like, and I actually did like it. I just need a break from just some church
Right.
responsibilities. But I was like the liaison on the board and just kind of helping to kind of coordinate all of the different children's
Right.
activities, because there's a lot. And so they asked me to do Vesper Thought. It was Children's Day. It was an amazing day and all of that. And I was telling them the story about when I left to go to New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And that Sabbath, and all the things that you all did, still have that blanket on my bed, all of that, but that the children, like that for me was like the most important. Carson was like, "We're not singing today." I'm like, "Okay." That's why you have your shirts on. Okay, I get it. I mean, it was like so young, and I just loved it. But I was telling them how, like, every time the children sang, I would say, "Do y'all know who my favorite group is?" And at first they didn't. I was like, "You all are my favorite group." And then I would start asking them. They were like, "We are, we are."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and I almost had no interaction with them other than that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I left and I was reading the letters that they sent me and the cards that they wrote me,
Mm-hmm.
and I read one specific one that when I read it, because I didn't read it till later, I was like literally bawling in my room while I was packing. And I'm just like, what? The impact that, and the point was the impact that we can have on children
Mm-hmm.
by just planting a little
Mm-hmm.
seed. You don't have to adopt, you don't have to foster, you don't have to be a children's teacher, you don't have to do any of that. You just have to love them when
When
you
you see
see them.
them, that's it.
Plant a little seed of greatness in them. Plant a little seed of God's love. Plant a little seed of how well they're doing. Don't just say, like, it's fine to say they look pretty or whatever. I'm not really a fan of those types of compliments, especially for girls, because I think that starts to be our only
Right.
value. But I'm like, point out something that you love about them. Give them not flattery, but give them compliments about their character and the
That
things
they're
that they're
doing.
doing and their activity. And I said, I literally almost never saw those kids. I mean, I saw them, but like I didn't interact with them other than that
Oh,
Sabbath
Sabbath.
in the
Yep.
hallway before they went up. And all of them were there singing and telling me how much they appreciated me and all of that. And I'm just like, we just have to do little things sometimes
Absolutely.
and support the people who are doing the bigger things so that we can leave a legacy for them that leads them
At least
to
into
citizenship.
citizens of heaven. Yeah.
So, Carell, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share on this topic as we close out?
I think that the thing that you said about the churches is important, that churches really should consider how can, like, the church is there to support the community. So how do you partner with social services and become that extended community? I can say during the
Mm-hmm.
time that we were foster parents in Richmond, there was only one church that consistently supported parents. They'd have, you know, kid, parents night out, and you could drop the kids off and they had activities and food and all that,
Mm-hmm.
and you could just get like 2 or 3 hours break, and they would do that consistently. Or every Christmas they would turn the church into like a gift shop where you could come and shop for gifts for the kids that you say are from you, but the members have purchased them. And I mean, these are not like cheap dollar store gifts. These are like, wait, I want this. And it's just like, but it was only one church. And I'm like, how many churches do I pass on a regular basis? And it's like, how are you supporting the parents who
Mm-hmm.
are taking on this burden? You know, we
Mm-hmm.
have to go and sit in court and listen to all of the experiences that the kids come to, and then we have no one to like cry to, that my heart is broken that this child has lived
Mm-hmm.
through this, and they're 5 and they've watched their
Mm-hmm.
mom get raped, or they've seen their dad do drugs, and you're taking that burden, but then who's supporting you? Like,
Right.
so I think that churches really need to consider that. Again, no one's necessarily saying you have to put out money or whatever, but just opening your doors to be a safe space
Mm-hmm.
for families
Mm-hmm.
who are taking this burden on, and they know that you're there. That's
Mm-hmm.
huge. That makes a difference. So I feel like we are lacking as a Christian community in that regard. Um, and so I feel like that's, like, as we're raising this new generation, like with our 3, we want to instill that in them. Like, even at 12, 8, and 3, you guys are ministers. You can minister
Mm-hmm.
to your friends that you see every day
Yeah.
at school, and you can be a light to them. So hopefully them doing that will help this next like they're planting those seeds, and we can
Yeah.
close the
Yeah.
gap. But yeah, we have to be the
That's
community God called us to be.
No, that's so good. That is so good. I love that a lot. And, you know, the problem that I have is that when I hear like good ideas like that, because I'm really into that kind of stuff, I just feel like, oh, we should do that here. And then I think, okay, but if we do it here, that means you're going to have to do
Hmm.
it. You just resign so that you get, and it's like all of these millions of ideas. And I'm just like, okay, you need to focus on this right now. Do what God told you to do right now. And then let's grow to
Yeah,
that. But I think that I do have a burden for our impact in the community that's beyond feeding the homeless, which is
right,
important. I, like I worked at Salvation Army. That's what I did.
right.
So I don't have anything with the homeless against them. I feel like they shouldn't be homeless and I want them to eat. But I think that our ministry to the community often stops there because it's kind of
It's easy to
easy
do.
now.
Hmm.
It used to be hard because people didn't do it as much and you're just like, oh, it's day. But now it's like, oh, it's kind of easy. They're all in one place. Let's take some sack lunches and let's do this or whatever, whatever. But it's like there's a community of people that aren't homeless who still need
Hmm.
Jesus. There's a community of people who, there's so many different communities and we can't necessarily minister to all of them, but we should be intentionally ministering to
To some of
some
them.
of them. So maybe we can start kind of a ball rolling. So it's like, okay, well, we're gonna focus on foster care and adoptive families. What about if you focus on this group? Like children in group homes,
Hmm.
because that's a
That's a
whole
whole
different
different that's a whole different
situation.
situation.
That's
Yeah.
different. This, no, and we're going to focus on this. We're going to focus on the LGBTQ community, because there's still hate crimes and all that. They're still navigating a lot of things. Like, I know that we're just like, but
God
like,
still
like I
God
just
still loves all of
that's
these people. He died for all of
yes,
them.
God still called. He loves
He
all
loves
of
all
these
of them.
people, and He called us to love them
Yep.
too.
Yep.
And that's one another way that we can leave a legacy for our children of what is the gospel really
And
about.
the other thing is get the children of the church involved. Like kids have
Yeah,
amazing ideas of how to reach
yeah.
other kids. So you
And they
don't
love
have to
it.
reinvent the wheel, and they get joy out of knowing that they did something to help someone else that's just like them.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And we can keep talking about, I just remember, I went to GYC one time, and I had Ebony, and Ebony was there, and her daughters, and they were 6 at the time. They're 21 now, so I'm like, it was a
long
long
time ago.
a long time ago. So at the after the lunch and all that, they were having outreach. And so, one of her daughters was with me, and the other one was, we went to the same place, but going to the door or whatever.
Mhm.
And she was like booking it to the door. She had her literature, she was knocking on it, she wasn't afraid of
Everything.
nothing. Booking it and she was just like, oh, we got to tell people about Jesus.
Hmm.
And so we are missing a resource of children who, when we teach them to love the Lord, we love them, and they want to pass that on. Sometimes the things that we're afraid to do, they're
They're
not
afraid to
afraid.
do.
And we could be really reaching the world in a way that we are failing to do right now.
I agree.
So, what an amazing legacy. Thank you so much,
Thank you for
Carell.
having me. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, gosh, thank you. I praise the Lord for even bringing that to my mind, even though, He could have told me a little earlier, but that's fine. He's like, you should have read the chapter a little bit earlier. Then I would have told you earlier. So we're not going to blame God. We're going to blame
Hmm.
me. But I appreciate it, because you just brought such richness to this conversation, like real life experience, not just talking about it. Because I can say in a million different ways that it's our responsibility, but to actually talk to someone who's just like taken on that responsibility and said, hey, this is our ministry. This is the joy of my life. This is what we're doing. And we are building citizens for the kingdom of
Yeah.
God. So thank you all. Thank you for watching. Thank you all for watching. We really appreciate you. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, all of the things. And until next time, make choices that will help you live, love, and marry wiser. God bless.